And are we going to go with, like, is this going to be like a New Orleans funeral? Is this going to be like a Viking funeral? Like, which cultural folkway are we picking for this funeral? Is it going to
more like a goldfish funeral?
Is it going to be a goldfish funeral? Yeah. Is it going to be? Have you ever read Hunter Thompson's obituary for Richard Nixon?
It's been years.
Oh God, it is such a piece of literature. Richard Nixon's body. Richard Nixon has gone home to hell, and his body is not fit to be burned in a dumpster. I mean, it was just like it's. So I'm not. I don't know which way we're going to this on Optane. I did go and I re-listened to the hype episode.
Which did we mention Optane?
Did we mention Optane? I believe your exact line was that Optane blew a DUI on hype.
Well, there's no better audience for my jokes than myself, removed by 6 months.
No, it was great. So no, we definitely talked about Optane. We then also used that, and unfortunately, I managed to get trolled by Past Us in that we also talked about HPE's The Machine and the Memristor. And Cole Frederick, who did the notes, I've got no idea how, but he dug up that HPE machine ad that I was describing. Did you watch that thing?
I did, and yes, I did. I think I tweeted it out afterwards or something.
I am so glad that he found that because I could be convinced that I dreamt that. It is so insane. It's bonkers. And HPE has clearly engaged a PR firm and paid them good money to scrub this thing off the planet. I mean, the one we're linking to is 100% illegal, no question. I mean, it is that thing is waiting. So I would say view it, but also don't, because I'm worried that it's going to get a DMCA takedown. It's amazing. That whole thing is just
it's like revenge advertisement or something.
Oh, maybe that's what it is. Yeah, that's exactly that.
like some cringy ad you made a long time ago that was a big mistake.
It's
left around.
God, no, this person keeps posting it to social media. There's just no amount of restraining order that will prevent them from doing it. But that thing is absolutely bonkers. And it does kind of dovetail in, I feel, to the saga of Optane. I'm kind of wondering where exactly we want to kind of tack in here. So one way I thought about tacking in is, first of all, because there was an article that was written that kind of prompted this in the Register. Wasn't very good. It was my tweet was, did Optane write this? Did you read that article? It was not great. Not the best.
I did read it, and it felt
very one-sided.
It felt like a weirdly apologetic, it never, it was never appreciated in its time sort of thing. I don't know. It felt much too fair.
It felt much too fair. And I also, in particular, it kind of implied that software is to blame for Optane's demise. And it's whoa. Software is not to blame. And to the contrary, I think that you and I have been around people, and we ourselves have been these people, predicting the non-volatility of main memory for as long as I've been in the industry.
Yes.
So my question actually, Tom, for you is, has that been true for your career as well, in terms of people believing that main memory will be non-volatile at some point?
Well, keep in mind, I got started with core memory, which is non-volatile.
Touche. Yeah, fair.
Right. And somehow there was no software required to make it volatile.
Right. But so has that been your experience as well, that people have been kind of, because I also feel that and actually, so Tom, this is actually interesting. It's a good segue in terms of the physics changes that you have seen in your career. I mean, obviously core memory to DRAM is a big one, and an important one for a lot of reasons. I was trying to think back to some of the physics changes that we have seen, because certainly, Adam and I, Adam especially, on the absolute forefront of the most profound physics change I feel we've seen, which is the introduction of Flash.
Yeah, Flash is huge.
Yeah, I think that's got to be true. But now I've got in the back of my mind some of the EEs working with us at Oxide, who may beg to differ on, IBM transitioning over to copper or something like that. But certainly, as I'm aware of, it feels like the most significant change.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to. Yeah.
The other long running tension is between fiber and copper, where people are always saying, "Oh, you're going to have to use fiber to get to those speeds," and then the copper guys come out with the latest thing.
Yeah, that's a good point, and certainly fiber and copper have been kind of leapfrogging one another, and each has advantages over the other. But copper certainly has economic advantages, and not. So yeah, that's a good point. I was also thinking like SMP, Tom. Just symmetric multiprocessing, and just in general, the hitting the memory wall and needing to add another compute element, and then ultimately, which I do. I mean, I kind of do consider chiplets to be a physics change where and in part because actually there were many people at Intel who believed that chiplets were impossible, that was the wrong approach, and that proved to be the right. So I don't know. I would kind of give partial credit to that one.
And Arnie just joined us, so maybe he can weigh in too with his more than 2 cents perhaps.
Well, I was going to say that on the sort of interconnect side, there's always the integrated photonics or
right.
Integrated light is just around the corner.
Just around the corner
here soon.
Well,
and I don't want to spoil it too much, but I've been told that it is going to take yet another couple more years, even though I was really thinking that it was going to happen, but no, not so much.
Well, and Arian, you and I are both hugely bullish on integrated photonics. Have we dragged you down this rabbit hole, Adam, on integrated photonics?
No.
It is a delicious rabbit hole. I mean, it is very exciting where you are effectively taking light straight into the die, right? And eliminating a whole, and then that allows you to go to much higher speeds, presumably much lower power. I mean, there are a bunch of reasons why integrated photonics would be silicon photonics would be super exciting.
Yeah, lower power, but also much better reliability.
Much better reliability.
I mean, the integrated photonics that Intel has been using for their optics that you can buy today, they claim 1,000 times better reliability. So 3 orders of magnitude less likely to fail than existing optics. Now, we would obviously have to put that to the test, but that's definitely where you need to be if you want to put photonics in a chip and solder it down to a board and expect it not to.
Yeah, but the photonics is great, but the lasers are still kind of sucky because of temperature problems.
Yeah, but that's their claim to that they solve that by integrating that all on a substrate. So it's all part of the silicon. So there's no separate parts there.
Right. Which is
I like the guys doing it with the off-board laser providing the light. Yeah.
Well, so I was also going to say like the purely optical computer, I feel was something. Because I remember I want to say like the early 90s, there was a research group that had some extremely promising results with a purely optical computer. It was going to be, and then that thing just completely evaporated. I've got no idea what happened to that. Another one that was a heartbreaker for me personally, and Adam, I know you've heard me go on about this for like fucking 2 decades now, but carbon nanotube-based memory. And this company, Nantero, that had a like super promising, and it's like still around, that nanotube-based memory. They had this great observation that instead of trying to grow these tubes in a particular orientation, they would let them grow kind of like all over the place, and then they would use photolith to zap the ones that were out of alignment, which felt like a really good idea. And then using like van der Waals forces to like bend these things, it just felt great. And they had like, Arian, it's interesting you should mention 3 orders of magnitude, because that does seem to be like the number of orders of magnitude that you need to really get attention. It was like 3 orders of magnitude denser than DRAM and 2 orders of magnitude faster than DRAM and then non-volatile. It's like, oh man, this is exciting. But no, it has not happened.
Well, there's also Everspin. It's got non-volatile, but they've never been able to get good densities or cost.
Everspan is what you call it?
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah. Everspin, right? SPIN.
Yeah,
Everspin.
Yeah.
And if it's MRAM. Okay, yeah, that's another one.
Yeah. Well, after we started seeing NAND in lots of places in the enterprise, don't you feel like there was this sort of renaissance of exotic memories that were people looking for the next thing in the hierarchy? Like all these technologies we were talking about sort of had their own sort of moment of discussion, in the sort of 2010 era, 2010 to 2015 era. as people were looking for the next step in the memory hierarchy.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that like certainly the NAND actually really bursting into the memory hierarchy and becoming meaningful for basically all compute, from personal computing, obviously handheld computing, and server-side computing. It did, I think, give a lot of inspiration to a bunch of these things, or maybe a funding, maybe.
You're right.
And the other one, Tom, do you remember holographic storage? This is another one of these where it's like, am I tripping? Did this actually happen? I swear IBM was talking about holographic storage. But
yeah, that definitely rings a bell.
Oh, guy,
there's some 3D type optical thing. I don't know if that was holographic.
Adam, I really thought you were just going to fuck with me and be like, oh, was a walrus there? And were you on a boat? I mean, I just thought you were just going to play out. Because as I was describing it, I'm like, this actually sounds more dreamlike. But no, they're holographic data storage.
Well, Brian, in that case, we've both had the same dream, because I also remember reading about that a long time ago.
Right.
So,
and it's like, what?
We might be sharing
sharing the hallucination. And I do feel that, like, we as technologists, it's incumbent upon us to remain optimistic about, I mean, it's like, we don't want to be too cynical about new physics, because those things can be really relevant. And so I think I just want to like set the stage that I would like to say collectively, are not anti-alternative physics. Optane, do you see where we're going with this? I know. I mean, I just because I feel like that was kind of the tone of that article, was that software kind of refused to adopt this thing, and I really feel pretty emphatically that that's not the case.
No, I think we wanted to believe. It just let us down.
Yes.
Jeffrey, you joined. Did you want to hop in?
I just wanted to say that Microsoft Research is still working on holographic storage.
There you go.
Oh, that's
good.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, like, all of these efforts are, I think, great and important. I think that we, now, all of that said, DRAM is really, really hard to beat. And if you're going up against DRAM, and it's also a moving target. It's getting better and better and better. It's been, I mean, it's not just riding Moore's law, but it is, there's so much economic incentive to continue DRAM densities. And of course, it's very high speed.
And that's the key. I mean, the economic incentives are the key of what made NAND pervasive, right? Because prior to its ubiquity in mobile, like, I mean, NAND had existed since the 70s or whatever, and even SSDs. So when we started building the ZFS storage appliance, or what would later become the ZFS storage appliance, we were kicking the tires on SSDs. And the first batch we got in like 2006, 2007 were all intended for ruggedized uses.
Right.
Like, show us the form factor of your helicopter and we'll tell you the right SSD, because, obviously you have a vibe problem. And then it was the next batch where we started seeing high performance and high capacities. But it was all, enabled by this economic shift.
Oh, wait, not all high performance. When was Mr. Shitbag in there? Do you remember Mr. Shitbag?
I don't. I do remember a drive affectionately known as Mr. Shitbag.
Yes.
What was its pathologies? I mean, it would certainly like go out to lunch for like a very long
Mr. Shitbag had worse performance than my IBM PC XT. I actually pulled the Seagate drive specs on that drive. It had 93 millisecond writes. And yeah, exactly. Well, because when
I played with the early batch of SSDs where you could get it so backed up that it could take 5 or 6 seconds for a write.
Jeez. Yeah, that's bad. Well, and so I think of that, and Tom, there's kind of an interesting thing there about like the nature of the physics with the NAND, like the way that it works, has certain implications for software. And I think it was actually really important to know how NAND works, know how it's operating, like know why it's called flash, right? I mean, the name flash comes from the way effectively the physics works. It reminded the inventor of a flash going off and effectively resetting a large bank. If I think I remember that correctly, right, Adam?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and that was at Toshiba, I think, back in the day, right? Whatever flash was.
Yeah, Toshiba invented it.
Yeah.
So, all right. So this leads us to. I do want to kind of get to the main event in terms of Optane, NAE, 3D Crosspoint, nay Apache Pass.
Oh, that I see. I couldn't remember the other code name because I remember coming to you at one point, probably in 2015 at Joyent, maybe 2016, and talking about like 3D Crosspoint or something, and you being like, "Oh, do you mean Apache Pass?" Because you had been read in by like folks making it, presumably.
Read in is really strong.
Sold?
Yeah, I mean, so we had, I mean, and I still like absolutely love our Intel rep. Was terrific. She was great, and wanted to give us as early visibility as she possibly could on things. And so she had given us early visibility to Apache Pass. It'd be interesting to know for folks that were at like hyperscalers that may have had that would have had much more intimate relationships with Intel. Or really just anybody that found out about Spectre Meltdown, not on Hacker News on January 2nd, 2018. But she was describing Apache Pass, and it's like intriguing in my first question, and it may have been actually, I think many of our first questions was, that's great. How does it work? Like, what is it? Is it holographic storage? Is it phase change memory? Is it MRAM? Is it, what, or is it something totally new? Like, what is it? And not for her own fault, but this was just the position of Intel was, they were not going to describe, in fact, have still really not fully described what it is or how it works. And this, I think we get to very serious failing, like debilitating, critical, fatal failure number one is that Intel's refusal and its secrecy in terms of describing how it worked, I think really limited what people could go do with it. Because, I mean, I actually think that it's really important to understand the physics of this stuff so you can understand. I mean, like, obviously, like, I'm a software engineer. I don't actually, like, I'm not going to weigh in on this. But I don't want to understand how it works so I can replicate it. I want to understand how it works so I can understand what the software implications are and how to treat it and how to think about, as we're kind of thinking about next gen stuff. And they would never answer how it worked. I don't know, Adam. Did anyone ever get an answer from Intel?
No, never. Never an inkling how it worked. But I think they did this weird position where they really thought it was going to be the golden goose, or the goose that laid the golden egg. Right? They thought that this was going to be both ubiquitous and proprietary, which those things don't happen at the same time.
Okay, that's actually, hold on. That's a really important point, actually. Just like, I think that's actually pretty profound, what you just said, in terms of like ubiquitous and proprietary don't exist at the same time.
Or at least not for long.
Right, no, I agree with you.
Might be held in tension momentarily. But they really believed this.
They did.
And they were, and correct me if I'm wrong, they were building special support for this into the chips they were making, like into the CPUs they were making.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to play at the Optane, super fast, playground, it was going to be Intel only when it came to CPUs.
Yes. And
so Facebook had a box, at least one, because I've never seen it because it was in a data center, but we did some experiments, or people in my pod did some experiments with writing the level 1 and level 2 structures of an LSM to this. But it never, I don't think it ever materialized into anything more than a prototype. And I don't know why. But I know there was an actual machine from Intel with indeed a Xeon CPU that was able to support this and that ran this. This was before we even knew what it was called.
Yeah, they definitely had the platforms prototyped and available for developers and all that. And, became a real product, but I'm not sure it ever had a viable roadmap.
And Tom, did you use it, or Arian, maybe when you at Facebook were using it, was this, in which kind of embodiment was this? Because I think the very confusion that Optane had about where do we belong is actually, you can see that in the form factor, where it was like, it was made available in both a DIMM and an SSD form factor. But I think that the initial vision, certainly as it was, I believe it was portrayed to us in whatever it was, 2014, 2015, was this is going to be a DIMM form factor. This is going to replace DIMMs.
Yeah, we were supposed to look at it as a DIMM because what they were trying to do is write, basically just use the in-memory structure, like the in-memory representation of the first levels of the LSM. You just didn't have to serialize them to disk. You could just leave them in memory, and they would always be in memory.
Right.
And so it would be crash safe and whatnot. And like there were some claims made that were definitely pretty wild, but that was the intent, to use that as the in-memory representation and just never have to serialize these, and therefore you would avoid all that overhead.
And then secondly, though, the position was that PCI Express was going to be too slow, and therefore it had to be on the memory bus,
right?
To really show off what it could do.
Arjen, this reminds me of you're talking about Facebook and it's considering Optane. I had a very interesting conversation with Jeff Rothschild. This was probably in 2016 because I was briefly an entrepreneur in residence, and he was doing some diligence on a company, and I was called in to do diligence on the same company. And I found myself in the uncomfortable position of making a claim that Jeff really didn't care for. And the claim that I made was that for memory, persistence is sort of a parlor trick. And the reason I said that was that if you've got data that is persisted that's important, and it's only on one node, so well, how useful is that in an enterprise setting? And he corrected me, saying that the startup time for these nodes in that Facebook infrastructure was critically important. Warming up those caches was critically important. I sort of agree with him, but it also feels like, and Brian, you've said this in the past, the volatility of memory has its benefits in that you don't keep around some corrupted state persistently forever.
Yeah. I do think that memory being non-volatile is both, there's terrific potential there, but also terrible peril. And because, if you've ever had, and Adam, obviously we have had in our careers, but in many ways, the gnarliest bug I've ever been involved in debugging was a kernel data corruption bug that managed to leap the fire line into CFS. And we had a couple of instances where that wild kernel data corruption had corrupted a buffer that was on its way out the disk. And it took us so long to put those two and two together that, wait a minute, I think it's actually one of the very few cases I think it's actually one of only two cases of on-disk CFS corruption I've had. And it was due to and so the idea that an arbitrary memory corruption issue, now all of those become persistent, that is a scary idea for sure. And I'm I want to think carefully before opening Pandora's box on that one. Obviously, Arjen, as you're talking about, as Jeff was talking about, there's great potential there too. I just don't know. I don't think we would want to make it transparently non-volatile. I think that would be perilous.
I think that's part of why that whole experiment never really went much further, or definitely never went into production. Because exactly that, if you want to protect against that potential corruption, then you're going to have to, in addition to what you're already doing in memory, you're going to have to add more over on top of that. And now you're starting to chip away at the benefits. So you're going to have to calculate some amount of parity and keep it on the side to potentially prepare your primary data structure. Right. And now you're chipping away at all those supposed benefits that you're going to have, and you might as well have serialized it somewhere and just kept it.
Yeah, on. Arjen, I feel like that's kind of another embodiment of what Adam is saying too, about you've got all these other factors now that you're going to have to consider because this is your single store effectively. And I like your point about, we don't actually use in software, this happens in hardware, but we don't actually keep auxiliary data structures to allow us to repair our state in memory. But we would need to do that in a world that's all non-volatile. So, Arjen, do you know what because I've got to believe though also that Adam, because you had another point that went on too in terms of it being Intel only, but before you get there, I think the other problem is just from a performance perspective, it just didn't deliver.
Well, in a price performance perspective in particular, right? It was, the beauty of NAND flash, after iPhone and iPods and everything dropped the price of NAND so dramatically, or I credit it for dropping the price of NAND so dramatically, was that it was like it really sat nicely in the middle of that hierarchy between in terms of price performance between disk and DRAM. And I always felt like Optane was like a little bit faster than NAND and a little bit cheaper than DRAM, as opposed to
and it was far overhyped for both of those roles.
Yeah. And there's also
and you couldn't get the density out of it to really use it for large. So we like looking at indices. It's like, okay, well, I don't know how much data that is going to be, potentially gigabytes of data, but because you can't go very deep in terms of levels there, so you quickly either run out of space there, and then you need to spill over to Flash anyway, and then you know the programming model doesn't work very well, and so there's all these auxiliary things. It's like there wasn't really a position where it would naturally fit, and I think that's.
And they only got to 512 gig DIMMs, but they required a normal DRAM DIMM paired with it, so the overall density was only twice as good as you could get with a 128 gig DIMM.
Yeah, that's a good point, Tom. And that was just kind of the burden of the form factor. So there are a bunch of and then you kind of get into like Optane as this, this very, as Apache passed, this kind of very promising birth. But then it becomes delayed. I mean, it definitely took longer than they thought, which fine, understandable. The economics didn't seem to deliver. The part of the reason that I kept asking, how does it work? And I kept trying to explain, like, look, if you can't explain how it works, I'm not going to adopt it because I can't just take a magic box. I need to understand how it works. And in particular, the reason I wanted to understand how it works is that the question that I had was, does it wear out? And the answer, even though Intel's been very reluctant to say it, is yes, it does wear out. And it is my understanding.
Really? Because
yes.
I never got a clear answer. Like
part of their PR blitz when it first came out was that it would not ever wear out. And then they had a major design change to support wear leveling on the DIMM stuff because it did wear out.
Right, and so
which makes the whole discussion about corruption of your persistence in memory structures
exactly.
all the more nerve-wracking.
Right. It's like, why are you worried about it? It's non-volatile. It's like, does it wear out? No. Well, maybe. It's like, wait a minute, what?
No, it doesn't wear out. Just be careful with how you write to it. Just don't write to the same spot all the time. So, which is it?
Well, of course, there's rowhammer, so you have to worry about DRAM too.
Fair. Well, and actually, rowhammer is kind of an interesting point, Tom, where you've got something that is a technology that's very well understood, and still we are learning things and getting surprised by the way that it behaves. In that case, I mean, because rowhammer won't actually, I don't think will actually destroy DRAM, but it will allow you to read cells that you shouldn't be able to read. But yeah, that's a very good point. I think that also at some point they're like, no, it doesn't wear out. And then it's like, no, it has like, it's 1,000 times better than NAND. And you're like, wait a minute. Isn't it like, wouldn't it be infinitely better than NAND if it doesn't wear out? Why is it only 1,000 times better than NAND?
So it's like, it's also 1,000 times better than NAND? Like older NAND, like NAND that isn't trying to get to,
right.
Like such tiny lithography.
And then I just feel like there was a bunch of like kind of stuff that's like kind of slimy, where it was like, oh no, like it won't wear out for the depreciation time of the asset, and you're like, whoa, that is not the question.
That's a big asterisk.
That's a big asterisk. Like this is like sorry, when I asked would it wear out, like that's not an accounting question. I mean.
No, it's like, no, the warranty is only 2 years.
Right.
It's like, no, wait, why do you mention that? Why are you talking about
because it won't wear out during the warranty period. Like, what do you not explain? What do you not understand about this? And then you're like, well, can you just explain how it works? No, we can't explain how it works. But it's also like, okay, is it phase change memory? No, it is not phase change memory. You're like, okay, which Intel did. I mean, Intel has, and I think that the EE Times actually, like, someone took one of these things apart and validated that it actually is PCM, it is phase change memory, and it is using calculated denied glass, but it is not. But it is more complicated than that. But it is phase change memory, and I don't understand why Intel. I don't know if they were concerned that if they just called it phase change memory, people would begin to ask a bunch of very legitimate follow-up questions. I don't get it. And I think it was a huge, so I think that was like kind of mistake number one, honestly, is not talking candid. I wish they talked candidly about it. left it as a research project that they're putting a lot of money into, as opposed to trying to really put it on a product roadmap.
Well,
Maybe they were afraid of attracting patent trolls if they named a technology.
Could be, but man, Intel's got a lot of lawyers. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And do you remember in terms of the product roadmap too? Do you remember they hyped its use as non-volatile memory, but the first products were all extremely expensive, slightly faster SSDs,
right?
And then tried to push a narrative around this hybrid model.
Yes,
where we had been using NV-backed DRAM in this kind of hybrid model, and it wasn't clear to me that like you needed that much, log space, intent log, effectively.
Well, plus all the new SSDs have DRAM caches anyway, so
totally. Well, and we had, I mean, that was actually the SSD that we affectionately named Logzilla, sold to us by the person who didn't go to jail. Unlike his brother, I think, right?
That's right. Well, I mean, they were all part of S-Tech together. So, but yes, only one of them went to jail. Yes.
What's the movie about the arms dealers? What is that? That is, I watched that not even that long ago.
Lord of
War. Don't you feel like we were kind of like playing out Lord of War with flash drives?
Now I do. Absolutely.
Wait, Lord of War or War Dogs?
War Dogs.
Was it funny or was it serious?
No, it was War Dogs. It was like,
okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking War Dogs. Maybe I need to go watch Lord of War. No, it's War Dogs, which is listed, by the way, Ariane, as a war/comedy. So there you go.
That's also a little. It's dumb. So yeah, it is.
It's comedy. But so maybe I should go watch Lord of War. But this is about out of War Dogs. Have you seen War Dogs? This is Jonah Hill.
No, okay. No.
This is about these guys.
They're both great.
That become basically arms dealers and get way over their skis. They kind of become accidental arms dealers and kind of get into this very shady underworld. And I feel like we were so early in Flash that as it turns out, the company that was the leading company in this, S-Tech, was involved in some really serious criminal activity in that they were stuffing the channel and lying about their results. And
lying about the results to the street, to be clear, this is a public company.
I feel like of the Machete brothers, like Mark did not go to jail. I think they were both like off on technicalities or something, but they clearly did it.
Yeah, and then they had to like kind of do some arrangement where Mark's brother, I can't remember what the other one wasn't allowed to be the CEO of the company. Anyway, there was a bunch of stuff.
The Elizabeth Holmes treatment. Yeah. So that drive. Sorry to get us. I didn't mean to take us down the War Dogs lane, but the Flash Dogs. That drive had had DRAM on it. That was the whole point of that thing. Is that it was using DRAM to front flash.
Yeah, and this was actually technology. So S-Tech was originally, or I guess when we stumbled into them in around like 2006. Was selling a lot of like consumer SSDs and consumer DRAM, and if you went to Fry's, it'd be packaged S-Tech. And they acquired this company GNU Tech from England that was building these pretty neat SSDs with FPGAs on them for the FTL and for the controller, and then acquired that company and then divested all of the less interesting parts of S-Tech to really focus on this technology.
And that particular device, from our perspective, didn't have crosshairs on necessarily DIMMs or even storage. It was actually battery-backed DRAM that we were seeking to replace with that thing.
Yeah, for us, it was a lifesaver in terms of having battery-backed DRAM effectively that was then dual attached. So getting out of sure, it's non-volatile, but how many machines can attach to it? But for their channel stuffing partner, EMC, it was replacing short-stroked 15K RPM disks.
Right.
And I don't remember this. We priced it sort of reasonably, like maybe twice what it cost us or something like that. Do you remember how EMC priced it?
No.
The same drive. what they did is they calculated the number of IOPS in a 15K RPM disk and then charged proportionally for these
That makes
SSDs
sense.
based
It's good to
purely
be
on the
king.
number of
Exactly.
IOPS. Absolutely. So these drives that we were selling for like, I don't know, like $1,000 were like, no joke, like $32,000 from EMC.
God bless STech for stuffing that channel. Who would stuff that channel? That channel deserves to be stuffed.
Yeah. Well, and just to fill in the details there, it was like the EMC bought a ton of them, thinking they were going to sell a ton of them. It turned out people didn't want them so much at $30,000 or whatever, and they said to STech, we have enough. Like, this is the last order. We're going to make this order because you're twisting our arm, but this is the last order you're going to get from us in a very long time. And then and then STech turned around and said to the street, up and to the right, everything's looking great. No obstacles on the horizon.
Don't know what you're talking
And
about.
then,
yeah.
And then the two brothers sold a shit ton.
Oh yeah, right. Then there's that. Then there's the wild
that.
profiteering from the insider
That's
information that the company is about to collapse.
Yeah.
There you go, but not convicted. I think, if I recall correctly, I think that they were.
Yeah.
But I definitely remember like a bunch of Wall Street Journal exposés. But like, hey, wait a minute, wasn't that the guy that was in our office? Like, I think I know that guy.
I mean, our current partner.
Right.
Yes.
So listen, I'm just trying to say that like when you're talking about new physics, it's gonna like it's a wild west out there. It is I'm not sure what the Optane equivalent of this is, but I also feel that like they were confused about who they were competing with. Is this better DRAM? Is this a faster SSD? And then there was Tom, did you have where they were making Optane available in these DIMM form factors that had both DRAM and Optane on them? And their firmware on the DIMM was going to take care of caching it was going to basically syncing things out from the DIMM. So they were fronting they were doing what the STech drive was doing.
Right.
I'm like, I do not want that kind of firmware on my DIMM.
That is terrifying. It's like these, these hard drives that have a little bit of NAND in them. I think they've kind of fallen out of fashion.
But the same thing that was just the prototype for the real Apache Pass product, where the firmware just moved into the CPU chipset.
Right.
And it's still dark matter in there that you can't.
So so Tom, this gets us to, I think, and Adam, you hit on this earlier, but this is another fatal failing of this, is that it required, and Tom, was that software, that logic, was that in the management engine? I feel like Robert knows the answer to this. So Robert, if you listen to this, I'm sorry.
No, I think it's a whole new subsystem in the chipsets that support that.
And in the memory controller, effectively. That would, yeah. So the upshot of this was that you could not use Optane on anything that was not from Intel. And that was really debilitating, because now if you get locked into Optane, you're also locked into Intel. And for us at Oxide, we actually did take a look at Optane. I don't know, I feel like we were taking a look at Optane when you joined, we were looking at Optane.
Brian, you can also look at this the other way around. If you buy something else in Intel, you don't accidentally buy Optane.
What do you mean?
I don't want Optane. To make sure, I'll just buy AMD, because
that's right.
I can never ever
right.
run an
right, exactly. You can't actually stuff Optane into my parts. Yeah, fair enough.
Yes, this will just won't.
Yeah, fair enough. But Adam, we were looking at Optane, right? I feel.
We did look at it.
Yeah.
Very briefly.
You know what? I choose to not remember that. Like, I don't remember that, but I think it's probably by choice.
I feel that
it was one of the bullet points on the list of in the shootout between the CPUs. We held the door open for a little bit of this would be possible if we had Intel CPUs.
But I feel,
and then we concluded, we don't want it.
We don't want it anyway. Yeah. I kind of feel like and I think that if Optane had lived up, it would have been a different world, and they might have been able to pull off some of the stuff had it been just absolutely just DRAM beating performance density and so on, and economics. Like, that would be, maybe you could pull this off, but definitely not with it being a laggard. And for us, it was just it was not. Now, there have been companies that have bet completely on Optane. Did you see this, Adam? Did you remember Vast Data? Do you remember these guys? They're around.
Yes. No, I do know about Vast, because our friend of Oxide, who may join us, had been doing some diligence on them, and because they were doing Optane as like a caching tier or whatever, not as it's like a hybrid storage, not the whole thing. Right?
Yes.
Right.
And Vast made a huge deal about the fact they're using Optane. So when I saw the kind of the announcement, whatever it was last week or whatever, I'm like, someone needs to do a welfare check on Vast to make sure, like, how's Vast? You see, their blog entry is like, things couldn't be better here at Vast, and I don't know what everyone is talking about.
Good. No notes.
Yeah, no notes. No, I actually like. You know what? Hey, I admire it. I'm like, they were, and the, the title of the blog entry is Vast's position on Intel Optane discontinuation, nothing changes. It's like, I mean, okay, some things change. It's okay. Like I think like we're gonna live would be fine.
Everything's fine. Don't worry.
Right. And I'm clearly like, I'm very sympathetic with any fellow startup, especially one that's taking a big swing. And so like, obviously, I want them to live, even though they bet it all on Optane. But again, I guess they didn't bet it all on Optane. I guess that's the point. It's like they do have some of their chips, and they're going to win it back. But actually, yeah.
I mean, their principles.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, their principal storage.
Tom,
go ahead.
Tom, no, I'm picking Tom.
No, you probably have a more interesting thing to talk about, so go for it.
Well, I know with Vast, their principal storage is QLC, and so the Optane is mostly as a write cache, so you don't wear out the QLC. So they can pretty easily do that with enterprise SSDs.
Right, interesting. Yeah. All right, good. So like very little changes, maybe something, but very little, which is good. So the Optane is on, and I think that they were the biggest adopter of Optane that I was aware of. Who was like the reference customer for Optane?
Well, the killer app was supposedly SAP databases.
Right.
You could restart.
Why am I forgetting about SAP? Of course. This is Adam's SAP HANA conjecture.
Yeah.
I don't know what specifically you're alluding to, but like if you put Optane and HANA together, like my head is about to explode just in terms of things that I think are such pure bullshit. But I guess people have deployed HANA.
Right. No, your assertion was that SAP HANA doesn't actually exist. And you asked to be proven wrong. Like, who has deployed it? SAP HANA is rolled out as the reason for every Intel feature. So they were using, I believe, secure enclaves. They were using transactional memory. That was an SAP. I mean, now I actually don't know if I'm making it up or not. Honestly, because now as I'm hearing myself, I'm like, this just does not sound plausible. But I swear,
it's like, isn't it obvious that like HANA doesn't exist? Like you need you need to like stand, on the mountain at midnight, with the full moon for it to come into existence.
For it to
well, the other point of view was that SAP HANA was anything and everything that SAP was trying to do.
Right. Which is, so that's always dangerous because you've got like two hyped technologies are looking to one another to support themselves. Like that's definitely dangerous. I also feel like, look, okay, yeah, I thought SAP HANA exists.
Right.
I don't have older siblings. Okay. The rest of you heard from your older siblings that SAP HANA doesn't exist. How was I supposed to figure that out? SAP HANA is your parents. Come on. Everybody knows that.
Yeah. And it's kind of like two startups depending on each other. It's like, it's not a big market.
I've just handed this by Patrick Mooney, also of Oxide, that at General Mills they do run HANA, and he's telling me more stuff, but I think he's already lied to me.
He's seeing if he can get you to believe that HANA exists. No, I'm sure HANA exists.
Yeah, I'm sure it exists. I choose to not believe it. Another one I choose not to believe.
But so that was I do feel that and this is where you do get into some very strange rhetoric from Intel that doesn't really make sense about how Optane, don't worry, Optane is being replaced by CXL. And have you heard this, Tom? Have you heard this particular line?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of true that I think at some point the CPU guys kicked Optane out and said, look, just put it on the other side of CXL. We don't want to deal with it. And then it became even clearer it couldn't really compete with the next generation SSD.
I just love the idea of the CPU guys kicking Optane out like it's a 20-something that refuses to get a job and can no longer live in the basement. It's
like, yeah,
Right.
you're not supporting your
yeah,
weight.
I'm just saying, like, I love you, Optane, but you just need to get a job at this point. Like, this is not working.
Man, transistors aren't free.
Because the early pricing of Apache Pass, it was only supported on the 4 and 8-way MP processors, which themselves cost 4 to 8 times as much, for no chip benefit.
Apache Pass was only on the 4 to 8 socket.
Yeah.
Holy. Yeah.
Initially, I don't know if they changed that.
Yeah.
But that was how it came out, and so you had to pay a huge amount of money for CPUs to support that.
So
that must have been different because Facebook would never buy a.
Yeah.
They drew the line at a 2-socket system. They would definitely not have purchased an 8-socket or 4-socket.
But this does kind of dovetail into something that Adam, you observed about Flash, and I definitely agree with, that Flash needed the mobile consumer to crack into the data center.
Yeah, or at least a huge volume consumer.
Right.
Like it didn't need to be mobile. I mean, it's very, very helpful that it was.
I mean,
these physics things need volume,
right?
To get refinement, and Intel was going after these super high margin applications where there's no volume.
Right, and I think that it is a real struggle for the alternate physics to go after the high end, and it's a struggle because it's going to be it has to be a very, very, very compelling use case economically. It is much easier. Sorry, Tom, go ahead.
Well, in any of these new technologies, you have to start with one very specific, very humble killer app, and then hope you can grow from there. But Intel was always like, well, it's memory and storage, and it's a whole new programming model, and you'll love it. And it's like, well, what's it really good for today? There's never an answer.
Right. And it's the GPU is the same way, right? I mean, it's like it really needed the mainstream market to have the ML applicability. I mean, I think it's like if you did not have a GPU, if one did not need a GPU, would ML alone, or maybe crypto alone, based on NVIDIA's results today, would that have been enough to to drag it into being? I'm not sure. I think it actually needed that mainstream market.
I mean, look at SGI, right? Like SGI got slaughtered.
Mainstream market.
Yeah, SGI got slaughtered from below by the ubiquity of the GPU, where then this high-end thing just got eaten by the consumer thing that was able to reach that kind of volume.
Right. So I think actually, the argument there would be like, hey, Optane, you've got to find a consumer use case, or it's not going to work. Like, what's the consumer use case?
Absolutely, but you can also see how the message probably played out at Intel during its lost decade, right? Where nothing was really working, nothing was top of class, and here was some, unobtainium that they alone had, and it was going to be the cure for everything. And when it reached flash level volumes, the economics were going to work, with probably no questions asked about how it was going to get to those kinds of volumes, or what the apps were that were going to drive it there.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, they did have the consumer SSD product for laptop flash or cache management. I'm actually using one of those as a ZFS intent log now.
You're using Optane right now?
Yeah, you can buy 16 and 32 gig Optane SSDs on eBay for reasonable prices.
I was not ready for that plot twist. That's exciting.
Yeah, and so they tried to get some volume, but the SSDs in general are so freaking fast. Nobody needed caching for them.
Yes, I mean there's just not a compelling consumer use case for it. I don't think over Flash.
So would we use it as an always on type thing then? Like let's say in a phone, like you would never have to quote unquote boot your OS. You would start it once, it would be in memory, and you would just keep it sitting there forever.
Well, in theory, but they would have to do a lot of software work for that. So that would take a long time to bootstrap that.
No, I agree.
Ecosystem.
You want to do software updates, and at some point you need to boot your phone anyway. So I don't know if there's actual value here, but if you wanted to break into the consumer market, what would be the feature that would make it the thing why everyone wants to ditch Flash and then go somewhere somewhere else.
Well, nobody
Nobody
knows
knows, right.
because that's the heart of the innovation is how do you really apply this?
And it would be interesting, Arya, to know, like, okay, let's just say, like, we've got something that is basically DRAM performance and it's non-volatile. Let's just assume that. And assume the economics deliver. Is what that thing is able to deliver, is that compelling? And is that compelling to the consumer? And I guess it would be like a phone that, and let's assume that our software doesn't have data corruption, all the other problems we talked about. Yeah, I guess it would be like a phone that you never.
Yeah,
It's the non-phone.
I don't know if the power consumption, for example, would work out. Like, is it because it's non-volatile? Does it consume virtually zero power when it's not in use? Can you turn it off? More or less?
Yeah. Can you like persist your memory leaks now?
Yeah.
Yes. Sure.
Yeah, you definitely get some power saving. That would be nice.
Do you get power savings?
An awful lot of people.
Of Optane over. I mean, maybe over. I can't even get
So
I
that's
can't even get the
know.
question answered of like what is the draw of a DIM, which is it turns out is like an unanswerable question. I don't know, Tom, have you ever tried to figure this out? It's like, all right, hey, listen, I'm just like,
No, I mean, I was assuming because it's not refreshing, but who knows what the basic draw is.
But we still don't know how it works, so we wouldn't be able to tell whether or not it's saving power.
Yeah.
Well, no, this is a very good point, Ryan, because I don't think we know how. I mean, it is phase change memory. I mean, it is, or ReRAM. It is going to basically operate by putting more current through at some point to change the resistivity of it. But how much more? What does that mean? What does that mean for the actual, like, and how does the draw vary on reads versus writes? I mean, I think that there was a bunch of questions that we'd want to get to that we weren't close to getting to because it was unavailable and uneconomic. We didn't know how it worked. But I think you would need to answer all those questions to know if there's something compelling there from a consumer perspective.
Yeah, Matt, you got a question?
Yes. So, well, a comment. So you were talking earlier about the danger of persistent memory magnifying the effects of data corruption, and I find that I only on my phone I only reboot in two cases. One, of course, is software updates, and the other is if there's something that's
amiss,
right, in the OS, or and I need to just reset it. So having more persistent memory, as you said earlier, might be a misfeature.
It might be.
It works for my best use case, which happens all the time, which is me running out of battery. That's the most frequent reason for me rebooting my phone. So it would help out a lot.
Yeah, my phone has the charming attribute that once it gets to 1%, if I plug it in, it consumes just enough additional draw that it will die as I plug it in, which is very nice. It's like, thank you, very little phone. It's like, and just for plugging me in, I will die. You're like, okay, never mind, fine.
Right. It was my fault for letting you get that low. And you're right. You're right to
exactly. You're right to boundary tree. But no, it's a good point, Matt. That we do have the idea that, I mean, we have volatility kind of baked into the way we think about these things in terms of like, I can get this back to a state. I can't do persistent damage to this thing. And there's kind of a social contract with your software engineers that persistence is going to be something done carefully, and we are not going to generate something where it's bricked. But it's not clear to me that would be a feature, and it's also not clear to me that it's. I don't know if non-volatility at DRAM performance, speeds, and economics. I mean, is it going to happen? I don't know. I used to think it was for sure going to happen, and now I'm a lot less convinced.
Well, do you want it to happen is actually the question, because we kind of conclude that it's actually really hard to program for.
I think I do, in that this is where the CXL thing does become interesting. So even though I think it's ridiculous that Intel is, and at Tom, I agree with what you're saying about like Intel is kind of like half right that CXL.
Well, sorry. What is CXL? I was just
so CXL is the Compute Express link. This is basically next gen interconnect, it had a rival next gen interconnect that was called Gen Z. I'm not making that up.
Nope, you're not making that up.
It's like
It's still the same.
But like,
mode.
how old do you
Still
have to be to errantly name a generation of interconnect after a literal generation?
It's like, everyone stop, pause. Did none of you have kids? Like,
No,
did
exactly.
none of you tell your kids what you worked
Right.
on? No?
All right,
Okay,
exactly. Fine. And also, it's like, I mean, Gen Z, the jokes do kind of write themselves. This is like the TikTok interconnect or whatever. But of course, they did realize that, like, maybe this is a bad idea. So Gen Z, ultimately, Gen Z and CXL were rival standards.
But they rolled it into one thing.
They did roll it into one thing, yes. And so if you go to the Gen Z website, you get basically a suicide note and how it's now like.
But Gen Z was 100% focused on load store memory semantics, whereas CXL is basically PCI++.
Right. And so, yeah, Tom, do you want to elaborate a little bit on what that means? Because I think it is. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's not as interesting. I think it is.
I honestly.
I think Gen Z came out of the machine from HP, where everything was going to be memory semantics.
Are you serious? Are you
just
saying that for my benefit, or is that actually where it came from? Did Gen Z actually come from HP's machine?
I'm pretty sure it was all part of the same evil plan.
Oh my God.
We've come all the way back to the beginning.
Please tell me there's a Gen Z ad somewhere in the walls of HPE that has not been released, featuring Star Trek characters. That would be just too delicious to hope for.
But there were a lot of people at both Dell and HP that were totally sold on Gen Z, and they had some super nice physical layer stuff, very low latency, but they should have applied that to something semantically useful.
Yes, and it sounds like that effort has been folded into CXL. So Adam, CXL will kind of replace, my understanding. Tom, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it will effectively, PCI ends up being effectively an implementation of CXL. So CXL ends up being backwards compatible enough with PCI that it's effectively, one mode of transit is over PCI. But it also will then allow us to treat things as DRAM or the way we treat DRAM today, namely coherent and able to participate in cache invalidation. That is actually looking more like an I/O device. So we can have CXL lanes to something that is an accelerator and actually have something that is like a GPU or another accelerator that's actually able to participate in it. Well, yeah, sorry, Tom, go ahead.
Brian, you're dangerously close to drinking the CXL Kool-Aid.
I think this Kool-Aid that I'm drinking right now is delicious. I was wondering where this came from.
Because everyone thinks that the C in CXL stands for coherent, but it doesn't really allow any new caching capabilities. What it does is standardize the way that you do mass invalidates. And basically, there's it's your turn to cache things versus my turn to cache things between CPU and device.
Okay, so
but you could still already cache things over.
Just to show you that I really am drinking the Kool-Aid over here, isn't that CXL 2.0 versus CXL 3.0? It's like, hey man, CXL 3.0 solves that problem. I feel like CXL 3.0 it kind of has a Duke Nukem Forever aspect to it in terms of, well, that's overly pejorative, but it does feel that like isn't that what CXL 3.0 is supposed to solve? God, get a load of me. What's going on? What happened to me?
We had
a related question. How real is any of this? Like, am I using this today and I don't know it?
No.
Or like my children's children going to use it?
It's just around the corner.
just along the line of photonics. Right?
CXL is coming pretty fast.
Yeah, it is.
And it's got good things. It's faster. But
and this is like some consortium of everybody and their uncle in terms of who's building this.
Intel lab.
Well, it's basically Intel said, here's what we're doing, and we'll open it up for you. So everyone jumped on board.
And with kind of the Gen Z getting folded into it, so AMD's joined it as well. So we will absolutely be using CXL at Oxide. CXL will be relevant for us. Now, what is unclear is whether that's CXL 1.x or 2.0 or 3.0, which has different ramifications for performance, but also for the degree that these things can actually participate in cache invalidation and so on, and snipping protocols. And then that to me has got ramifications for, I think, and Tom, maybe God, I just can't believe I'm saying these things, but it does feel like it allows us to think differently about the way we compose compute elements in the system in terms of having these special purpose compute elements that are able to really participate in the system in a way that right now, like in NVIDIA GPU, is kind of this other that you've got to send things to. Am I drinking the Kool-Aid over here? What's going on?
Well, I'm not sure where they are in terms of the 3.0 spec, but I'm pretty sure with 2.0, it's still very primitive in terms of.
Brian, do you remember this at Sun? There was we had these multi-socket systems, and I don't know if we designed it or Sun Labs designed it or some third party designed it, but there was like a video card that you could plug into a CPU socket. Now it sounds like I'm dreaming.
Yeah, exactly. Now who's recounting their dreams? And then what happened, Adam?
And you were there,
right?
Yeah. But maybe you weren't there. It sounds like this does not ring a bell.
Well, so what rings a bell actually is something that's even nuttier, where they put an MMU on a graphics card, and then they forked the memory system in the operating system. This is for Leo back in Sun 4M days. I don't know, Tom, if you had any overlap with Leo. This would have happened. I think this is the kind of thing that Tom would have quit over. Honestly, this is like the.
No. This type of thing I wanted from the early '90s was for I/O devices to be MMU compatible with the CPU.
You didn't want it like this.
Yeah, I don't know how they did it.
It was a mess. It was a big mess. But that is not what you're talking about, Adam. You're talking about a graphics card that went into CPUs. Well, yeah, I feel like that was not. That's where I'm.
Like, sure, that could have happened.
Yeah,
that might have been real. Anyway,
that's right.
Anyway, it's like rather than like QPI or something. This is like not as fast as kind of in the brainstem as QPI, and but a lot faster than PCI. Is that a fair summary of CXL?
I would say incorporates the next gens of PCI, and this is what allows for. I'm going to say disaggregation, but just your reminder of Jeff Rothschild. One of Jeff's rants that I really love is he hates the term disaggregation. He's like, you actually mean aggregation. You literally mean the opposite of what you're saying. It's not disaggregation, it's aggregation. And then Robert is trying to coin amalgamation for this. But where you are taking, like, this is where you kind of get to the bonkers future that I think Intel's talking about, where, with CXL, you can now have a pool of future Optane memory, whatever that is, that all of these nodes are able to connect to coherently. And that's the Kool-Aid I'm not drinking. I ain't drinking that Kool-Aid. That's where I draw the line. There are lines that I draw around here from the Kool-Aid perspective.
Yeah. I don't know about that one. I'd like to see that one first.
So if you want a little more divergence into Sun history, the early '90s was a wild west of networking, where we were doing Ethernet and FDDI and ATM and fiber channel, and this thing called Taylor, which was very popular with the hardware guys, and it was going to be coherent shared memory at LAN scale.
Taylor, like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy? Taylor like Swift?
Yeah, TAY, named after the efficiency expert guy, Taylor. But I could never explain to the hardware guys why this is such a bad idea.
Someone help me Google this one. Are you getting it?
No, it was totally a Sun technology.
Okay. Oh, this is strictly internally.
Yeah, but it had a lot of support.
It had a lot of people drinking that Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I can get like the appeal of, and I do think this gets into like, why did Intel get so excited about Optane? I think, Tom, it was you or Adam that made the point that there was this was happening during Intel's lost decade, and Intel needed like a great hope on the horizon, and Optane kind of so there's this kind of internal narrative inside of Intel that like Optane will save us all, which certainly didn't do anything to like to temper expectations of the technology.
Yeah, and the hype machine was so vivid. I just was never I mean, I don't think I was ever positive on the technology
I,
because they never showed me that one simple use case.
yes, I feel that I never got positive on the technology because they never explained how it worked. And when I asked how it worked, they would say like, "You're the only person that cares about this. Nobody else cares how it works. Only you. Like, you're the only one that asks this question."
Everyone that we've sold this to just accepts
exactly.
it.
Right.
It's like,
What?
all right, how many people have you sold it to?
And so I kind of resent that whole line. People should not let their, especially technology partners that they're going to really go do some really deep things with. You should not tell someone that it doesn't matter that I'm the only one asking. It's not even true. First of all.
Intel had a corporate problem of being really good at training their marketing people to lie. So the marketing people wouldn't know it, but they're still lying. So the only place you could ever get the truth was from the register.
Are you saying they had like something like youth education camp where they would abduct future marketeers as like children, so they don't actually know they're lying to them? They believe that they're telling the truth. They're gonna like
pretty much
around. Yeah. Wow. Okay. All right. They got dark. Yeah. So in terms of the kind of the lonely death of Optane. I mean, I feel like the writing has been on the wall for this thing for a while. Adam, this thing was not.
Yeah, like almost from its inception, it feels like, or at least from its first products. Like each product was progressively less compelling as the expectations just got higher and higher. But the only time it seemed interesting was before it existed.
Yeah. It kind of ended up like ended up like a gambler on a losing streak. It was like, we're going to put more and more on the next generation. It's like, no, like I'm going to make it all back in the next generation. It's like, and it was just not happening. And it was
like, oh no, we're gonna get the volumes by shipping the SSDs, and then that will bring down the price for the memory. And it's like, well, yeah, right. You're never like, you're just in hock. Like you're never gonna make this back. You should just pick up your chips and go home.
With what few of your chips remain. And then what's the business with Micron? The Micron marriage and then subsequent divorce over this thing is super weird. And Tom, I don't know if you had.
Yeah.
Do you have any insight into that?
Not really, but the real nail in the coffin was when Micron sold off the fab. That was the only fab that.
Well, so like I alluded to, I have a friend who's been close to this, and has drunk way too much of the Kool-Aid. And one of the things that clearly Intel has indoctrinated him in is blaming Micron. Like the failure of the reason why
it's your mother.
Optane,
it's your mother. I actually want to have this. I would be very reasonable. I just want to see you every other weekend, and your mother's preventing it.
It's like that Optane would be fine had it not been for Micron losing faith, and then they'll never get to the volumes and so on and so forth. So I mean, he said this to me with a straight face, like he believed it. So clearly, he had been hearing it from a lot of folks, even though it's like total nonsense.
And you you think that Mr. Snub, our shared acquaintance here, was a real advocate for Optane? He said he drank the Kool-Aid.
Drank the Kool-Aid. Maybe it was just that he had been working with with folks from Intel on some collection of products, in and around Optane. And I sound vague, but that's as clear as he was with me as well. And so I don't know that he drank the Kool-Aid necessarily, but I think that he was around it so much, and so many other folks were drinking the Kool-Aid that some of these messages started to sink in and take hold. And the other thing that was funny is that like he found out about the death of Optane the way that everyone else did, that no amount of proximity to Intel clued him in, which you also get a sense of from the vast blog post.
Yeah,
where they probably had not heard about this 6 months ago to get their ducks in a row.
I mean, obviously everyone knew that Optane had been transitioned to hospice care. I mean, this is not a huge surprise, I don't think, was it? I mean, I don't think that they had done enough that it was clearly struggling at pretty basic levels. So it was not. I don't know. I was not hugely surprised by it, especially after the Micron divorce.
I don't know. I was working with otherwise smart people who were still pretty optimistic about
Really? About Optane?
Yeah, within the last year.
That's impressive. Could they volunteer how it worked? I mean, that's I'm like looking for
No.
someone who can just tell me definitively how it works. I want to know. I mean, again, obviously it's PCM, but I should say obviously it is apparently PCM, but I would like to know how it works. So I know there are a couple of other folks here that had joined us. I wanted to, if anyone else wanted to jump in with their perspective on the death of Optane, the sad and lonely death of Optane.
Yeah, so maybe I'm kind of biased on my opinion here because I've been working on Optane for almost a year now,
Okay.
because that's what I do research on. So I find essentially Optane to be a cool technology at the end of the day, because it kind of gives this byte addressability feature, although it's essentially a storage device, and provides these huge increase in read performance, especially random read performance. So it was really hard for me to understand why, maybe economically it makes sense, but I strongly believe there could be killer apps. I mean, if Intel allowed maybe a few more years to roll, that's my opinion, because I clearly have seen or built applications that have seen 2 to 3x performance improvements on Optane itself, or viewing Optane as a storage medium. I totally understand that the cost might not make any sense at all, but that's what I feel.
Well, what do you think? What do you think
this
those
is-
use cases might be, Vinay? Like, what are those killer? What might potentially those killer apps have been? That and how would they get there in terms of the economics?
Right. So in terms of economics, I have no clue. Right. So I think CXL, essentially, in my opinion, CXL killed Optane, because now when PCIe Gen 5 is going to give you such bandwidth capabilities that what you get on Optane DIMMs, it doesn't really make sense to take that precious area, that real estate on the DIMMs. So I see it does make sense to put it behind Gen 5, and now that CXL offers store interfaces, again on the DIMM slot, but as a technology in itself, providing byte addressability, I mean storage platform providing byte addressability and increased random read performance, a lot of algorithms that have been traditionally designed for doing traditional read accesses, traditional write accesses, which are all sequential, and also doing block kind of accesses, increased a lot of read write amplifications. So all of that is going to go away if it's byte addressable. So I find that super exciting, honestly.
Okay.
So I have a contrarian opinion there, and actually, the thing I resent most about Intel and Optane is how hard they pushed all the research community to do stuff, and presumably funded a lot of that, but basically a huge amount of wasted time. Whereas what they should be doing is making memory virtual again, because you could do all these things with virtual memory. It's just kind of slow these days. Why is it slow? Well, it's the CPU.
So
okay,
well,
so
isn't it the media also? I mean, sure, virtual, the CPU can be slow, but isn't
No,
the media also a limitation?
it's page faults are just too damn slow.
okay,
If page faults were getting as fast as other things, we'd be doing amazing things with virtual memory.
And when you say page faults, you're talking about paging something in from a backing store, Tom. So this is like what we call like a hard fault, where you've got something that is missing in DRAM because it's been paged out to a backing store.
Right.
Which is all that the Optane DIMM was
well, not really, right?
doing
Because
it in hardware.
Not really, because that's still slower, right? Because even if you did a page fault and you need to access something, if it's not Optane, you still need to do a 4 KB block access. But if it's a byte addressable device, you don't need to do that additional amount of data.
Optane DIMMs used 128 byte cache lines.
Right. Essentially, it was
so that was
bytes.
The minimum. So what about an architecture that had variable size pages where you could have small pages when you need them?
Yeah, sure. So that's my point again, right? So it's a good idea to provide byte addressability feature through the hardware itself, rather than having a virtualization layer that will kind of give you a charade of byte addressability. Because at the end of the day, behind the scenes, you will still be doing a large amount of data transfers. Like, you would want to avoid that data movement unnecessarily. The whole point of Optane or like byte addressable storage is to be efficient in accesses, right?
Okay, so
yeah, I'm going to make up a bunch of red hats that say make memory virtual again.
Well, and so one of the other things that I find very interesting across the board is that everyone thinks that Optane is a great solution to a problem they themselves do not have. And it,
yeah,
like academia looks at it and says, this is a really great solution because it's got these XYZ factors and it might be good to do this. And the people in industry who are doing this look at it and say, no, it costs too much, or it doesn't actually behave well according to XYZ real world conditions. And like, the media obviously looks at it and says, yeah, this looks like it ought to be good for something. But there's a pretty decent number of people on this call who have all looked at Optane and said, yeah, it's probably good for something, but not me. And with the exception of Vast and HANA, I don't think I can really name many people who said, yeah, it's a good solution for me.
well, and then Matt, I think it's a good point. And then you also have to think like, all right, if that's the problem you've got, is this the best solution? Is this the most economic solution? I mean, I think, Vinay, I think, first of all, thank you very much for joining, and it's great to get your perspective. I won't let Tom beat you up too much for being, Tom's treating you like an Intel marketing arm. We've got to, I think it's great that Intel, I don't care if research is funded by Intel. I actually think it's good that Intel is funding research.
Also, honestly, I don't think I'm funded by it's being honest here.
All right, well, it's okay if you are. It's fine. It doesn't. But I do think that the economics, and I mean this is something that I do think is important, is that economics is very important in our industry, and it's a very important dimension of computer architecture, and it's tough to factor that out. Certainly, we can't factor that out. I would also say that power is something increasingly that we can't factor out. I think power has been often factored out, and you got to, as we know at Oxide, I mean, I think like I like the idea of SmartNICs, for example, but SmartNICs come at a power consumption, a rate of power consumption that is really problematic when you start deploying racks and racks in them. So I actually think you can't factor that stuff completely out. I also wonder, so you said it's like 2 to 3x for random read workloads, and presumably you're looking at you've got workloads that exceed the working set of DRAM, but are small enough to fit in Optane. Is that a fair summary?
Right. So now I think maybe this might not be a realistic setting where in one configuration I viewed Optane as the final storage medium that you would want to reside the data on, right? Like if you have DAXFS on top of Optane, that's essentially the file system in the AppDirect mode that you would configure Optane in. And you would treat all the data that's there on it as the final destination. So it's not as if is the data going if the data is not going to fit in the DRAM, then it's going to fit into Optane. But it's not about data that's not going to fit into Optane. You're essentially right. Like whatever you said is what I looked into.
Right. I mean, I've seen, I think, a terabyte Optane DIMM versus a 256 gig DDR4R DIMM, right? They make terabytes now, right? So you're talking at most a 4x increase in capacity at basically the price of DRAM.
That's right.
Price per gig of DRAM.
Is it the price? Isn't it more expensive than DRAM, right? From a price per gig perspective.
Depending on how you want to fudge the numbers around for them.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly by the end, I think Intel was, and actually Intel is sitting on a bunch of inventory. This is the real question: is what happens now that this body has kind of toppled over on the Silicon Valley Serengeti. who are the scavengers that come and pick up the Optane inventory? What happens to that?
No, I think it comes down to what you were talking about, Brian. I mean, nobody builds. Very few people build large-scale memory systems nowadays, right? It's all. It's usually you span out and don't scale up. So this is a very nice solution for scaling up, especially when you want higher memory density. When you want to populate or buy larger, like let's say 512 GB DDR4 memory, it's going to be very costly to build such kind of machine, right? But if you have a mix of DDR4 and Optane, it'll be much cheaper. This is what the presumption that Intel did.
Vinay, but we're still in denial here. You're talking because you're talking about Optane like it's going to be something that you can buy.
Right.
Adam, let him mourn. Let him mourn in his own way.
Yeah, exactly.
This is an intervention.
No.
Well, how long are we going to let this
it's
go
also
on for,
not
Brian?
like building it out of Optane is actually any cheaper than building it out of DRAM is, which is really like the big killer, right? Like,
I kind of like the fact that Vinay has brought his smelling salts to the funeral and is trying to revive Optane. I think there's I feel there's something charming in it.
I will grant that Optane as a underlying technology would have been really interesting. I mean, I came to it more from the Micron side than the Intel side. Like, I talked to Micron in the past about like, hey, can we just buy those chips? Because like I'm not running Xeons here. I'm building,
Totally. Okay, so Matt, I'm dying to ask you.
Performance. Yeah.
Did mom shit on dad the same way that dad shit on mom? I mean, how did they?
Well. So in Micron's words, Intel threatened to sue us if we sold it ourselves.
Okay, so this marriage is going south. This marriage,
they basically said that they had Intel put in most of the R&D money on it, and therefore claimed most of the IP rights on it, and therefore the pricing from Micron would have been even worse than the pricing from Intel, because remember, Intel was selling this at a loss right up till the end.
Right.
They were like, yeah, I mean, we could in theory try to make a commercial product and sell it, and we'd sell like 2 of them,
Right. And so, I mean, they were trying to make the economics, they were trying to defy the economics. Clearly, and if it would be helpful to know how it actually worked to understand, I assume that part of the problem is just in the actual fabrication of this.
I have some interesting notes on that.
Yeah, go for it.
So from our man on the inside,
Mr. Shrub,
who would love to join but can't, tells me that there's a warehouse full of Optane, both raw SSD and in the DIMM form factor, just sitting there. And the plan is to draw out of that and manufacture things out of that until the EOL, and doesn't know the date of that. He refers to this as the strategic Optane reserve.
I'm getting a little concerned because we've already described him as drinking a little bit of the Kool-Aid. I mean, clearly that's a Jonestown reference. This is just I like where you're going feels like is there a rapture that's going to come? I feel like there's is Judgment Day coming? Is Optane going to judge the living and the dead? I'm concerned.
So apparently one of the big challenges of Optane
No, Brian, the Memristor will rise from the dead after 3 days.
There you go.
So apparently one of the big challenges with Optane was with the fab, and one of the differences between Optane and Flash, and isn't of the details, was that Flash could be switched out for MLC or TLC or SLC or QLC without a huge amount of overhead, whereas Optane, based for reasons he doesn't fully understand, they basically had to dedicate the fab to this, and so what they did recently is did a big run of Optane. That is the last Optane that we humanity will ever have. And it's sitting around in various states of completion.
So, Adam, I would also add to that it's not just that you can switch the fab between SLC and TLC and 2LC and QLC. You can actually switch chips at runtime on a page level between those different modes if they're higher level. And you can trade reliability for capacity in real time, which is something that who knows with Intel? Intel, clearly Optane can do it because it's magic memory. But
so Matt, are you saying that? Because I do think this is kind of an interesting point about how a traditional way. if you're in semiconductor manufacturing, you've got ways to change yield. You can bin things. And it's been done for time immemorial, where you are able to take parts that aren't performing as well, and then those get binned differently. Are you implying that Optane doesn't have perhaps some of those advantages, and therefore economically it's just they don't have this ability to kind of dynamically change the yield, which makes sense. Again, I don't know.
So I think I can, since no one knows how it works, I'm somewhat hypothesizing here, right?
Right.
I think what happened was basically, like with typical flash memory, you'll have a whole bunch of pages that get lumped together in a chip, and you get to, like flash memory doesn't come with a statement saying this is a 2 terabyte chip. It comes with a statement this is a 2.1 terabyte chip. And by the way, there's 5% of this isn't bad. Figure it out for yourself. It's left as an exercise to the reader. But by the way, we guarantee page 0 is good, so at least you know where to store your table of all the other people who are bad, right? And you can go through and you can change your error correction. You can do other things to try to keep this keep this whole circus running. I think Optane, what they ended up doing, just given the fact that there's a lot of mysticism and there's this inherently highly intelligent controller, and there is this DRAM cache on DIMM, I think what they basically ended up doing was stripping away 100% of everything they had planned for process yield and basically saying, well, we think we can make this work if we fix it all in software.
Oh, God.
And so basically, like, if you are having yield issues, which it sounds like from all sources they were, like my best guess is it sounds kind of insane.
Oop, not sure. Adam, can you?
Yes, you were there, but Matt seems to be gone.
Okay.
So I think where he's going is that the Optane's not going away. It's just being frozen for future generations to revive.
It's being cryogenically frozen. So hey, there are some other folks that Wes and Siddharth wanted to give the opportunity to hop in here.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I was at IBM when all this was going down.
Yeah.
And one thing that IBM was interested in for years was putting PCM on DIMMs. And IBM had already moved the memory controller out to the DIMM, so each DIMM could have its own memory controller that was specialized for what was on it. So you could have, a DRAM memory controller, or you could have a PCM DIMM with a PCM memory controller. So when Optane came out, IBM was like, great, it's obviously PCM, let's buy it. And we heard from Micron that oh yeah, the chips that we sell are only for storage. You can't use them for DIMMs. Because, and somebody else already said this basically, Intel basically owns the idea of the DIMMs.
Oh boy.
And, they wanted that Xeon lock-in, so they didn't want even IBM to be able to make,
Intel's always doing this with their new tech.
Intel, come on.
Yeah.
They put so many marketing restrictions on things that they don't let other people figure out how to use them.
But it's talk about not dancing with what brought you. I mean, that's not what made Intel the company that it is.
So I think Micron was almost like a fake partner. That's how I think about it. That it seems like Intel did all the work. Intel actually developed it. Intel was the only customer for it. And Micron was like a third wheel or something that was just not needed.
Micron was Intel's beard for just to go home with the family. So
yeah, I guess.
I mean, did they need a manufacturing partner? Or what was the genesis?
I have no idea.
So I
Can
think
some insider please write a book about all this so we can read it?
So I was going to say, I think the fab from the Micron side was probably what Intel really needed, because they didn't want to cut down capacity on their main thing, and they already had, been dinged hugely for their logic stuff around that time, right? So that's A. But B, I actually don't think generally PCM or any of the quote-unquote memory stores are dead. Although caveat, here that this is also a lot of what my research is on, so I am biased. But I think IBM's been showing PCM down at 14 nanometers. TSMC is offering resistive RAM in commercial now, so not even RISC. So I'm not quite sure that they're dead as a general concept. They might be dead for Optane specifically.
I mean, I hope not, honestly. I mean, I just think, just to kind of, and maybe this is going to bring us around to where we started, but I think it's really important that we are actively engaged in researching alternatives, and that some of these alternatives that are showing promise, like PCM, even though it's been around for a long time, but like continuing to develop that, I think is really important, because I think it's just important to kind of develop this in the right way. We can't lose track of the economics, but I think I'm glad that I guess I don't view PCM as being necessarily dead. I view Optane's embodiment of PCM, despite whatever our Mr. Snub thinks about the coming rapture of Optane memory. So, Adam, what happens with the warehouse of Optane?
They draw down for like replacements. So like they've got some contracts in place, they've got some parts under warranty, and I guess this sort of Indiana Jones like warehouse just gets drawn down as it's needed, until they finally say, we're out, or they take what's left and throw it out back.
So actually, a quick question: has anyone used Optane systems amongst you all? So have you had user experience, quote unquote, from that side?
So I mean, the Aryan did. I did not. We did not, because it was never. We just couldn't make it economically pencil out, and then also the fact that they wouldn't describe how it worked, and then it was kind of like constantly shifting about what the focus was. So I think by we I mean originally at Joint and now at Oxide, I think we're probably like a lot of folks. It's like definitely interested, definitely curious, but not in this embodiment. And so no, we didn't. Adam, you never used it, right?
I mean, not in anger. I like benchmarked a drive. Really out of curiosity, and it was fast, but for all the reasons that you just described, it didn't go beyond that.
Yeah, because I kind of wonder if it went down the same way, the PS3 Cell did. The performance was amazing, but then expensive to make, and then just the programming model was so bad that no one really wanted to. So that might, because honestly, that's one of those things that I think ends up killing a lot of these products. It's not so much. I mean, Intel and all, regardless of what anyone else says, their hardware is good. Like, they have really clever people, right? I think the problem ends up being once you go up the abstraction layer, like, it's just really difficult to think about what kind of correct programming model you should use for a lot of these memories. I think that can end up being a major issue.
I think that by pushing a new programming model, they hurt themselves. They should have said, this is really useful before you do any software. But most people couldn't do that.
I think if it had been really compelling, and if it had been economically compelling, we would have dealt with it in software. We would have found a way. And it may have been a new abstraction, but I think the cell comparison is interesting. I disagree with it, but it's interesting because Cell had a super wacky programming model, and I know that Jonathan was on here earlier, and we went into that in our episode with Jonathan Blow, talking about Cell a lot, which is really interesting on the metal. But I don't think that this is so radically different that it couldn't have been programmed around. And I think if it had economically delivered, and certainly we've seen this, the things that are indisputable, things like SMP. I mean, SMP changed things radically for software, but it also was economically indisputable. So we dealt with it. Things like caching, right? Caching made system software, like quite a bit more complicated, but economically it was indisputable. So we dealt with it. So I feel that if it had delivered on the performance and the economics, we would have dealt with it. No question. I think that so I think it's an interesting kind of proposition, but and certainly the fact that to the degree that it did require any additional, a change in the programming model, that didn't help. I mean, one question is like, does the non-volatility even matter? Certainly for Fenezi's case, the non-volatility wasn't all that important because he was using it just as like DIMMs effectively.
Yeah, but Brian, I can argue that for SMP, it took decades to sort out the kernel issues.
It took it didn't take decades. I mean, it was a mess a little bit, but it also was like it was a mess, but it was also economically indisputable. I mean, there was there was just no way you were going to get away with being a uniprocessor operating system. Folks tried, right? There were S&P deniers, right? Like, did HPUX famously have the entire operating system run on one core or one CPU, and they ran only applications? It's like, obviously that's not going to work. And ultimately everybody had to adopt SMP, and there were people that believed you couldn't make the system scale, and you can, because the economics always win. This is kind of it's my feeling.
It's still kind of a mess, though. Like, what's the right argument to put after make-j? Your OS still has no idea.
Yeah. So I mean, okay, fair. Although I think that's for other reasons. I do think that like the opacity of the system in terms makes that's harder than it should otherwise be. But you are able to run a big parallel make, and you are able to leverage all those cores, and we're not going back from that, right? And we're not going back from CPGPUs either.
Yeah, it's true. It's just if there's two of you, you will fight to the death over those cores if you both try to run that parallel make together, and your OS will have no idea what to do about it.
That is true. But I just feel like, yeah.
I mean, there was still a simple abstraction as well available on Optane, to honestly speaking, right? There is still a file system that you can put on those Optane DIMMs, and you can map a file and use it as a byte reducible mallocked area. So, like, I agree with you, Brian, that if it made economical sense, there were ways.
Oh, I'm not sure. Did Vinay go away for everyone or just me?
Oh,
I never know. All right.
Oh, am I audible?
Yeah, it's Twitter Spaces. If only Optane could have solved the Twitter Spaces problem. Really interesting. All right, Mark.
Okay.
I think we're going.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Yes.
Oh, okay, perfect. So yeah, like I was saying, there was always a simple abstraction on Optane available. Like, for example, you could just put a file system on these Optane DIMMs, and then memory map a file and use it as a mallocked area to do all your byte reducible interactions with it, right? So I agree with you, Brian, that there's always ways if it economically makes sense in the software layer.
Yes, if it economically makes sense, we're going to deal with it. I mean, look, like, no one's on x86 by choice. Jesus, I mean, we would be on a different instruction set architecture. We went through a lot of pain to accommodate x86. All right, Mark, I think we're going to let you get the last word in here, so we kind of wrap up. What's your welcome to the Optane funeral? What are your
Yeah, I'm truly sad about it, actually. I actually am using Optane in production. It's about twice as fast as NAND flash when it comes to pulling data sequentially off of it, and about 4 times faster at random 4K reads. But overall, given the price of these Optane drives, it's actually just not worth it, because they're basically 10 times the cost for maybe 2 times to 4 times the performance.
Yeah, that's just a gutting note to end on. I mean, because that's it, right, Mark? I mean, that is basically, that's kind of the beginning and end of it. It's like, hey, you're using it in production. The technology works at some level. It's just that it economically is like, juice isn't worth the squeeze.
Whereas NAND was the opposite ratio. It was like, 10 times faster and 2x the price. Not precisely, but it was more of those kinds of orders of magnitude, or more of those kinds of scale than this inverse.
I was really hoping the economy of scale was going to fix that, but apparently that's not ever going to be the case. So I'm not doing anything special in my Rust code to say that this is an Optane drive that you're writing to. So I'm probably leaving some performance on the table, but even so, like, it's a big hill to climb when it comes to getting another 5x performance out of it. I don't think programming is going to do that. However, the IOPS from it are absolutely incredible. Like 1.5 million IOPS on a single drive is really nice.
And then, Mark, I assume you have an application where the kind of the data set that you're working with exceeds DRAM and fits nicely in that the span of the Optane drive.
No, actually, I needed it specifically because I needed the storage to be absolutely bomb-proof. And so when I write to the drive, I want to make sure that when it's written, when the OS says it's written, it actually is truly written out and not hitting a DRAM cache before the flash. So I wanted to make sure that it absolutely was on storage when I get back the call from the OS saying that, yes, this is written.
So you actually are using this for its write performance. I mean, that's
I'm using it for yeah, absolutely. I'm using it for an SQLite database of all things. Basically, Wendell Wilson of Level 1 Techs put me onto the drives after saying, like, you can see pretty significant performance in this one specific case when you're writing to an SQLite database where it will be at least twice as fast as what you are before.
And you're able to have all the internet hang off of a single SQLite database or whatever it is. I mean, you've got a use case that really needs that performance that is able to have that performance shine.
Yeah, and that's like the only reason why I kept the drives at this point, because I can't really guarantee it properly without doing a bunch more programming work to make sure it works somewhere else.
And okay, then I've got to ask you though, that does the limitation with respect to Intel CPUs, does that bother you? Because you're obviously having to use,
So actually, I'm running it on AMD EPYC.
Well,
I'm running on a Milan chip.
Because it's just because you're
using the drive. Right. You're just using the drive.
Yeah, right. I'm using a P5800X.
Right. So you're just using actually. Right. And so has the DIMM form factor ever been tempting, or no? Because of the you're using Milan, so no, the DIMM form factor has not been tempting.
It hasn't been tempting for me. My data set is not big. My entire application will live in 1 gig of memory, and I keep on installing Debian, and it's keeps on telling me, "Hey, you need swap." I definitely don't need swap. You're gonna have to trust me on this. I just need write performance.
Right. Well, I feel that this is a fitting end. I mean, Mark, I feel that that's a fitting final word. It's just hey, economics are really, really important in architecture. And this thing was interesting and promising. And the underlying technology in terms of PCM is not dead. And we may see alternative physics that ultimately break the economic barrier, but it ain't Optane.
Yeah, I wanted it to be good, but it's not worth it.
It's not worth it. Well, rest in peace, Optane. Roll on Optane Rapture for those who are waiting for the warehouse of Optane to come again and judge the living and the dead. And yeah, Adam, any final thoughts?
No, I mean, always a solution in search of a problem that it never quite found.
And there we go. All right. Well, hey, thanks everyone for joining. Hey, in a very uncharacteristic act of advanced planning, we actually know what our next 2 Twitter Spaces are going to be. So we're going to do next week. We are very excited to have Kate Hicks from the Oxide team talking supply chain. So Adam, I'm really looking forward to this one.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
It's a question that's come up for people asking what we're doing at Oxide about the supply chain. Kate, who was at Apple and actually Intel briefly before coming to Oxide, has been instrumental in what we've done about the supply chain. So really looking forward to getting Kate's perspective. That's going to be a lot of fun. And then the week after, we're going to have Eric on the engineering team, who you've heard from Tales from the Bring Up Lab, along with a couple of other folks talking about bringing up our 100 gig backplane and all of the adventures there. We used to be, Oxide needed a 499 ohm resistor and to live. If you had listened closely to our Tales from the Bring Up Lab or more Tales from the Bring Up Lab, and that has been bested by the 100 ohm resistor that we needed to get the cable backplane to work properly. But we're going to talk all about that and about signal integrity. It should be a great Twitter space, and that's coming up in 2 weeks. So join us then. Thanks as always. Thank you everyone for participating. Those of you who are actually running SAP HANA, we're pretty sure it's not actually your parents. So don't worry. That's actually it's not a trade. All right. Thanks everybody.
Thanks,
Take care.
Everyone.